When our nosy neighbor called 911 over a new gate, she thought she was teaching us a lesson. Instead, she unknowingly summoned the county's chief of police right to her doorstep. We bought the ranch to get away from it all. 10 acres of rolling hills, an old farmhouse that needed more love than we had sense, and a big, beautiful sky that wasn't polluted by city lights or neighborhood drama. That was the dream, anyway. The reality was that to get to our little slice of heaven, we had to drive through the freshly paved, perfectly manicured hellscape known as Whispering Pines Estates, a brand new HOA community full of beige houses and even more beige personalities. And the queen of them all, the self-appointed guardian of all things beige, was Brenda. Brenda lived in the house right by the main road, the one we had a legal easement to use. This meant she saw us come and go every single day, and she seemed to consider it her personal mission to document our every move. She was the head of the Architectural Review Committee, a title she wore like a 5-star general's uniform. You could always spot her on her morning power walk, clad in neon pink lycra, a visor pulled down low, and a clipboard clutched in her hand, ready to slap a violation on anyone whose garden gnome was an unapproved shade of red. Our property, the old Miller Ranch, was explicitly not part of the HOA. It was a pre-existing property, grandfathered in with its own set of rules, which is to say, none. This fact seemed to be a constant, grinding irritant to Brenda, a splinter under her perfectly manicured fingernail. The trouble started with the gate. Our property line began where the Whispering Pines' pristine asphalt ended. The old entrance was just a rickety cattle gate that was more rust than metal. We decided to replace it with a proper sturdy gate made of heavy timber and wrought iron. Nothing fancy, just something that said, "This is our home," and more importantly, "Please don't let your poodle wander in and get chased by our chickens." My wife Sarah was overseeing the installation. She'd taken the day off work and was out there in her oldest jeans, a faded t-shirt with a small coffee stain on the front, and her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was talking to the 2 guys from the fencing company, pointing out where the new posts needed to sink, when the pink lycra-clad harbinger of doom appeared. Brenda Power walked up to the property line, stopping just short of our land as if it were contaminated. She didn't say hello. She just stood there, hands on her hips, her lips pursed into a thin line of pure disapproval. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescending sweetness that could curdle milk. "What exactly is going on here?" Sarah, ever the patient one, turned with a calm smile. "Hi, Brenda. We're just replacing the old gate." "Replacing it?" Brenda scoffed, taking a dramatic step back. "This is a major structural installation. I don't recall seeing any AARC request for this. This design has absolutely not been approved." Sarah's smile didn't waver, but I could see the slight tightening around her eyes. She had a long fuse, my wife, but people like Brenda knew exactly how to chew through it. "Brenda, we've been over this. Our property isn't part of the HOA. We don't need the ARC's approval. The easement agreement is very clear about maintaining the aesthetic harmony of the community," Brenda shot back, tapping her clipboard for emphasis, even though it was empty. "And that monstrosity," she said, gesturing to the beautiful timber beams lying on the grass, "is not harmonious." "It's a gate, Brenda. It's on our land," Sarah said, her voice still level, but firmer now. "We'd appreciate it if you'd let these gentlemen get back to their work." This was the wrong thing to say. To Brenda, being dismissed was like a declaration of war. Her face turned a shade of red that clashed horribly with her pink outfit. "You people think you can just waltz in here and do whatever you want. You are a blight on this neighborhood. I have half a mind to call the authorities. This is destruction of property." "Whose property?" Sarah asked, genuinely confused. "It's our gate. We're replacing it with our other gate." Brenda was beyond reason. She pulled out her phone, her fingers jabbing at the screen with righteous fury. "That's it. I am calling 911. There are trespassers here destroying the community entrance and being aggressive." My wife's jaw dropped. The 2 workers just stared, their drills silent in their hands. I had just walked down from the house with bottles of water for everyone, and I stopped dead in my tracks about 20 feet away, watching the scene unfold. "You're calling 911?" Sarah asked, her voice dangerously quiet now. "Brenda, do not do that. That is a massive abuse of emergency services." But Brenda wasn't listening. She held the phone to her ear, a smug, triumphant smirk spreading across her face. "Yes, hello? I need to report a hostile situation at the entrance to Whispering Pines Estates. Yes, they're tearing down the gate. They're very aggressive. I feel threatened." She looked directly at Sarah, whose face was now a blank mask of disbelief. Brenda's voice dripped with fake fear. "Please hurry. I'm afraid of what they might do." She hung up the phone and puffed out her chest, that victorious smirk now fully settled on her lips. In the distance we heard it. A faint siren, growing steadily louder. Brenda looked at my wife, clearly expecting to see fear, maybe tears. But what she saw instead was a look of pure, unadulterated pity. A look that said, "You have no idea what you've just done." The wail of the siren grew from a distant cry to an ear-splitting shriek as a patrol car, lights flashing, screeched to a halt at the edge of the pristine, Whispering Pines asphalt. A young officer, looking like he'd barely started shaving, stepped out of the car. His name tag read, Evans. He had that wary but determined look that all new cops get when they're responding to a situation in progress. He adjusted his belt and strode towards the scene, his eyes scanning the two burly fence installers, my wife in her dirty jeans, and Brenda, who was practically vibrating with self-importance. "Officer, thank God you're here," Brenda exclaimed, rushing towards him. "This woman and her accomplices," she gestured wildly at the installers, who just looked bewildered, "were destroying the community entrance. When I, as a concerned citizen and head of the Architectural Review Committee, tried to intervene, she became incredibly belligerent. I honestly feared for my safety." Officer Evans looked at the half-dismantled, rusted old gate, then at the new timber beams lying neatly on our side of the property line. He looked at my wife, who hadn't moved a muscle. She just stood there, arms crossed, with an expression that was 1 part exhaustion and 9 parts disappointment in humanity. "Okay, let's everyone just take a breath," Evans said, his voice the epitome of forced calm. He turned to Sarah. "Ma'am, can you tell me your side of what's happening here?" Before Sarah could speak, Brenda jumped in again. "Her side? Her side is that she's trespassing. This is HOA property." "No, Brenda, it's not," Sarah said, her voice cutting through Brenda's whining like a razor. She looked directly at the young officer. "Officer, my name is Sarah Miller. This is my property. That," she pointed to the old wreck of a gate, "is my gate. We are replacing it with this new one." She gestured to the new materials. "Ms. Albright here seems to be under the mistaken impression that her HOA's jurisdiction extends beyond its own borders. It does not. She was harassing my contractors, and when I asked her to leave, she called you." Officer Evans looked from Sarah to Brenda, a flicker of understanding dawning in his eyes. He'd probably dealt with Brenda, or someone just like her, 12 times already. Frivolous calls were the bane of their existence. "Ma'am," he said to Brenda, a hint of weariness in his tone, "is this property actually part of the Whispering Pines HOA?" "Well, no, not technically, but the aesthetic harmony," Brenda stammered, her argument already starting to fall apart under the calm light of official scrutiny. "Okay," Evans said, holding up a hand to stop her. He turned back to Sarah. "Ma'am, I understand. It seems like a simple civil dispute. Do you have proof of ownership for this parcel of land?" "I do," Sarah said calmly. "It's up at the house, but I have my driver's license on me if you need to run my information." "That would be great, thank you," the officer said, pulling out his notepad. Sarah walked over to her beat-up pickup truck, reached into the glove box, and pulled out her wallet. She walked back towards the officer, not with the hurried nervousness of someone being questioned, but with a slow, deliberate stride that seemed to command the space around her. Brenda watched, smugness returning to her face. She probably thought Sarah was about to be arrested for something, anything. "You should check for warrants, officer," she chirped. "These ranch people can be very shady." Sarah ignored her completely. She reached the young officer and opened her wallet, but she didn't just show him her driver's license. With her thumb, she pushed up the leather flap that covered the other side of the wallet, revealing a polished gold badge and a crisp, official-looking ID card. Officer Evans's eyes scanned the ID. His posture changed instantly. He went from relaxed but alert cop to ramrod straight, as if the police commissioner himself had just walked onto the scene. His face drained of all color. His mouth opened, then closed. "Chief," he stammered, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry. I didn't recognize you, ma'am." Brenda's smug grin froze on her face. Her perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up into her hairline. "Chief?" she squawked, her voice a shrill mess of confusion and indignation. "What is he talking about? Chief of what? The garden club? Is this some kind of sick joke?" Sarah didn't even look at her. She just gave Officer Evans a small, sympathetic nod. "It's all right, Evans. You were just doing your job. How's the new beat treating you?" "It's fine, Chief," he said, still looking mortified. He then turned his head slowly, deliberately, to face the woman in pink lycra who had made the call. His expression was no longer one of weary patience. It was cold, hard, and utterly devoid of sympathy. He looked at Brenda as if she were a particularly disgusting insect he'd just found on his boot. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat and heavy with authority, "you want to explain to me why you just called 911 to report a fake threat against the county's chief of police?" The silence that followed Officer Evans's question was profound. The only sound was the gentle breeze rustling the leaves in the whispering pines that gave the subdivision its name. Brenda's face went through a rapid series of transformations. First came blank confusion, then a flicker of dawning horror, followed by a wave of pale, sickly green. Her jaw worked silently, like a fish gasping for air on a riverbank. The words chief of police seemed to be bouncing around inside her skull, refusing to find purchase. "Chief of police?" she finally managed to whisper, the words barely audible. She looked at Sarah, truly looked at her for the first time, not as the ranch person in dirty jeans, but as something else entirely. She saw the quiet confidence, the unshakable calm, the way she held herself with an authority that had nothing to do with an HOA title. The coffee-stained t-shirt and messy ponytail suddenly seemed less like a sign of sloppiness and more like the off-duty uniform of someone who spent her real work hours dealing with things far more serious than the color of a garden gnome. You can't be," Brenda stammered, pointing a trembling finger at Sarah. "You live here. You drive that old truck." Sarah finally turned her full attention to Brenda. Her expression wasn't angry or triumphant. It was something far more devastating. Tired. It was the look of a person who had hoped for a peaceful day off and had instead been dragged into the petty nonsense she spent her professional life trying to manage. "Yes, Brenda, I can be," Sarah said, her voice even. "I am. And right now, I'm a citizen on my own property being harassed by you. But in about 8 hours, I'll be back in my office reviewing incident reports, and I will see a report, filed by Officer Evans here, detailing a 911 call for a fabricated threat. A call which pulled an on-duty officer away from potential real emergencies. A call about me." Officer Evans, now fully recovered from his initial shock, had his notepad out again. This time, he was writing with a grim purpose. "Making a false police report is a serious offense, ma'am," he said, his voice all business. "It's a misdemeanor, carries a hefty fine, and can even include jail time. Wasting police resources is something the department, and especially the chief," he glanced at Sarah, "takes very seriously." Brenda's entire body seemed to deflate. The self-righteous indignation drained out of her, leaving behind a quivering, terrified woman in an absurdly bright pink outfit. The clipboard fell from her numb fingers and clattered onto the pavement. I didn't know," she whimpered, tears welling up in her eyes. The gate. It wasn't harmonious." "The gate is not your concern," Sarah said, her voice sharp for the first time. "My property is not your concern. My family is not your concern. Your little kingdom ends at that curb, Brenda. You need to understand that. Today you crossed a line. A very serious, legally defined line." Brenda was openly sobbing now. Big, gulping sobs that were probably as fake as the fear in her 911 call, but they were a testament to her terror. "Please," she begged, looking back and forth between Sarah and the stone-faced officer. "It was a mistake. A misunderstanding. I won't do it again. I promise." Sarah let the silence hang for a long moment, letting Brenda stew in the consequences of her actions. She looked at the two fence installers, who were watching the whole drama with wide-eyed fascination. She looked at me, and I gave her a small, supportive shrug. Finally, she looked back at Brenda. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Officer Evans is going to take your statement and file his report. A full report. And I am going to press charges for making a false report." Brenda let out a horrified squeak. "However," Sarah continued, holding up a hand, "the DA's office has a very good diversion program for first-time, non-violent offenders. I imagine they'll recommend a significant number of community service hours, a substantial fine paid to the county's emergency services fund, and a formal written apology to me and the contractors for the harassment. If you complete all of that without complaint, and if I never ever hear from you or about you again, I might be inclined to tell the DA you've learned your lesson. Do you understand me?" Brenda nodded furiously, tears and mucus streaking down her face. "Yes. Yes, I understand. Anything. I'm so sorry." "Good," Sarah said. She turned to Officer Evans. "Evans, get her information. I trust you'll handle the report professionally." "Yes, Chief. Absolutely," he said, gesturing for a sobbing Brenda to step aside. Sarah then walked over to the two fence guys who looked like they'd just witnessed a unicorn wrestling a Sasquatch. "Gentlemen, I am so sorry for that interruption. Please continue with your work, and add an extra hour to the bill for the delay. We'll cover it." They just nodded, stunned into silence, and immediately got back to work, drilling with a newfound and intense sense of purpose. Sarah walked over to me and let out a long, heavy sigh. She leaned her head against my shoulder. "So much for a quiet day off," she murmured. I wrapped an arm around her. "You handled that perfectly," I said. "I think you scared 10 years off her life." "Good," she said, a small, weary smile finally touching her lips. "Maybe now she'll stick to complaining about lawn ornaments." We stood there for a moment, watching Officer Evans take a statement from a thoroughly broken Brenda. The new gate post was being set in concrete, a sturdy, beautiful testament to our own little slice of heaven. The line between her world and ours had just been drawn, not in timber and iron, but in the undeniable ink of the law. And we knew with absolute certainty that Brenda would never, ever cross it again.